She was right about one thing: nobody was going to help Clayton Rivers. He didn't need them to. This is the story of what happened when a woman who had never been told no in her entire adult life walked onto 200 acres owned by a man who spent 28 years making sure machines the size of football fields didn't fail in the middle of the ocean. By the time this story ends, her $75,000 Lexus will be scrap metal. She will be in handcuffs on her own live stream, and the butterfly garden she destroyed will be blooming again. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the beginning, because the beginning is what makes the ending hit so hard. Clayton Rivers did not retire looking for a fight. He retired looking for silence. After 28 years in the United States Marine Corps, most of it spent as a hydraulics specialist aboard aircraft carriers, Clayton had lived in a world of constant noise. The hiss of hydraulic lines under pressure, the roar of jet engines on the flight deck, the groan of steel under the weight of a 100,000-ton ship cutting through open ocean. He had supervised systems that, if they failed, would mean jets couldn't launch, couldn't land, couldn't fly combat missions. There was no margin for error in his world. There was only the job, done right, or catastrophe, and he was exceptional at it. But 28 years of exceptional is exhausting in ways that civilians rarely understand. It isn't just the work, it's the weight, the responsibility, the constant low hum of what if that never fully leaves a man who has held lives in his hands. So when Clayton hung up his uniform for the last time, he knew exactly what he wanted. Land, quiet land, land with room enough that the nearest neighbor was just a name you waved at from your truck window. Land with a creek, land where you could stand on a hill at sunset and hear absolutely nothing made by human beings. He found it in East Texas. 200 acres of rolling pasture and creek-bottom hardwood, red dirt roads, a small stock pond that caught the sunset like a mirror, a modest farmhouse that needed work but had good bones, the kind of place that felt like it had been waiting for someone who would take care of it properly. Clayton paid cash. He didn't borrow. He'd lived beneath his means for 28 years so that one day he could do exactly this. He bought it for himself, and he bought it for Sarah. Sarah Rivers had been fighting stage 3 breast cancer for 14 months when they closed on the property. She'd been through 2 rounds of chemotherapy. She'd lost her hair and gained it back and was about to lose it again. She had an oncologist she trusted, a treatment plan she followed precisely, and a spirit that her doctors described, in the margins of their notes, as extraordinary. But hospitals are not places where the spirit survives on its own. Sarah needed something to believe in outside those walls. She found it the moment she stepped onto that land. She stood at the edge of the south pasture, in the warm wind, and she said, "Clayton, I want to build a garden here, a butterfly garden, something that lives." And so she did. Over the course of the next year, through infusions and good weeks and terrible weeks, Sarah planned and planted and tended a butterfly garden unlike anything that land had ever seen. She chose plants that bloomed in sequence, so there was always something flowering, always something to draw the monarchs and the swallowtails and the painted ladies that drifted through East Texas on their migrations. She built winding stone paths between the beds with her own hands, placing each rock herself on the days she felt strong enough. Clayton built her a bench in the center of it, cedar sanded smooth, with her initials carved in the back. They kept cattle on the north pasture, a small herd, nothing commercial, just enough to give the land purpose and give Clayton something to manage. He fixed fences in the mornings. He learned the names of trees he'd never had time to learn before. He and Sarah ate dinner on the porch every evening the weather allowed, watching the light change over the pasture. For the first time in 28 years, Clayton Rivers exhaled. And then Brenda Winchester found his gate. To understand Brenda Winchester, you have to understand what it means to be the president of an HOA in a small East Texas subdivision for 11 years. It means you have authority, real authority, the kind that comes with the power to fine people, to send letters that make grown adults anxious, to sit in judgment over fence colors and mailbox heights, and whether your neighbor's holiday decorations are tasteful or excessive. Brenda had held this authority for 11 years. She had run 3 HOA board members out of their positions. She had fined a retired school teacher $400 for having the wrong color mulch. She was, by the account of nearly everyone who dealt with her, exactly what she appeared to be, a small person who had found a small pond and made herself its largest fish. But here is the thing about Brenda Winchester that you need to understand before the rest of this story makes sense. She genuinely believed she was right about everything. Always. This is the most dangerous kind of person in any dispute. Not the villain who knows they're wrong, but the true believer who has constructed an entire reality in which their actions are not just justified, but righteous. Brenda had used the road through what was now Clayton's property for years before he bought it. The previous owner had never objected. His silence had, in Brenda's mind, become permission, and permission, over time, had become entitlement. And entitlement, over 11 years, had hardened into something that felt to Brenda like a legal right. She called it community access. She called the road a historical easement. None of it was true, but Brenda didn't know that yet. And if she did know it, well, that's a story we'll get to. The first time Clayton noticed the tracks, he assumed it was a mistake. Someone had come through his gate and cut across the south corner of his property, right through Sarah's butterfly garden, crushing a row of black-eyed Susans she'd planted along the fence. Clayton filled in the ruts. Sarah replanted the flowers. 3 days later, the tracks were back. Clayton happened to be outside when it happened the third time. He watched as the white Lexus drove through his gate without slowing, without acknowledging the private property signs he'd posted, without any apparent awareness or concern that it was on someone else's land. He walked over and looked at what it had left behind. Tire tracks through the wildflower bed, a cedar fence post snapped at the base, and in the center of it all, scattered across the red dirt like something grieving, the white petals of the oxeye daisies Sarah had spent 3 weeks coaxing from seed. Clayton went to the hardware store and bought a chain and a padlock. He then drove to the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision office and asked to speak to whoever was in charge. That was when he met Brenda Winchester for the first time. He was polite. He explained that he'd noticed vehicles using his private road and that he'd locked the gate. He asked them to use the public road going forward. Brenda listened with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she said with absolute confidence, "That road has been a community access point for longer than you've owned that land, Mr. Rivers. We have a historical easement. I'd strongly suggest you remove that chain before this becomes a legal matter." Clayton said, "Ma'am, if you have an easement, I'd like to see the documentation, because in all the title research I did before buying that property, I didn't find one." Brenda told him she'd have her attorney send it over. No documentation ever came, but something else did. On a Tuesday morning, 11 days after Clayton's visit to the HOA office, he went out to check his south fence line and found his padlock gone. Not broken, gone. Cut cleanly with bolt cutters and removed. He replaced the lock that afternoon. It was cut again within 48 hours. He replaced it again, this time with a heavier chain, a better lock, and a trail camera positioned to capture the gate from 2 different angles. The camera caught Brenda's white Lexus arriving at the gate at 7:14 in the morning. She got out. She produced a pair of bolt cutters from the back of her SUV. She cut the chain with the practiced ease of someone who had thought through exactly how she would do it. Then she drove through, stopped, got out, reattached the chain with her own lock, as if this established some kind of ownership, and continued down the road. Clayton filed a police report. The responding deputy told him he'd pass it along. Nothing happened. He filed again. He was told it was a civil matter. Then Brenda began advertising. She had organized what she called authentic Texas ranch tours for Meadowbrook Heights residents, $50 a person, guided walks through the pasture, along the creek, past the stock pond. She posted it to the HOA Facebook group. She called it a community experience. Clayton called it what it was: trespassing and fraud. Clayton found out from a neighbor who'd bought a ticket and called to ask what time the tour started. That Saturday, 17 people arrived at his gate. He met them there, politely explained that this was private property, refunded every single person himself out of his own pocket, and sent them home. Then one afternoon, Clayton returned from a supply run to find his cattle scattered. The gate to the north pasture hung open. The cattle had spread across 3 adjoining pastures and onto the county road. He spent 6 hours in the Texas heat rounding them up. One had been struck by a vehicle and needed a vet. The gate had not been broken by wind or accident. The latch had been opened by a person. He said nothing to Sarah. She was in the hospital that week for a scheduled infusion, and the last thing she needed was this. He called a lawyer. The property attorney listened to the whole story, looked at the documentation Clayton had already accumulated, and said, "Clayton, I've been doing this for 30 years. In those 30 years, I have never once seen an HOA have a valid historical easement over a private ranch road that wasn't clearly documented in the original land title. Before we respond legally, I want you to get me a forensic land survey, the real kind, because if that easement doesn't exist the way she says it does." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. When Clayton's attorney sent Brenda a formal cease and desist letter, Brenda did not cease. She did not desist. She went to war. Within 2 weeks, she had filed a formal claim asserting a historical easement, a complaint claiming Clayton's property violated HOA codes, and a letter to Clayton's bank requesting that his line of credit be frozen pending legal resolution. That last one is the one that took Clayton's breath away. Sarah's cancer treatment was not cheap. Even with his military benefits and supplemental insurance, there were costs. Clayton had a small line of credit against the property to cover gaps in coverage, to pay for medications that insurance declined, to keep the bills manageable. Brenda was trying to cut off a veteran's access to funds while his wife was in cancer treatment. Knowingly, deliberately, Clayton sat with this for a long time. He looked out the window at Sarah's butterfly garden, and he made a decision. He was not going to respond emotionally. He was not going to escalate. He was going to do what he'd done for 28 years when something important was broken and lives depended on fixing it correctly. He was going to diagnose the system, find every fault, build something that would not fail, and then wait for the right moment to deploy it. He hired a forensic land surveyor named Gerald Moth, a specialist in historical land rights research who had testified as an expert witness in over 200 property cases. He filed public records requests. He installed 7 additional trail cameras. He began keeping a written log, 47 pages long, growing daily. Gerald took 6 weeks. When he came back, he sat across from Clayton at the kitchen table and said, "Clayton, I've been doing this for 31 years. What I found in this case is, without any exaggeration, one of the most brazen land fraud schemes I've ever encountered at the county level. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA had held a legitimate easement over the property, granted in 1972 for a term of 15 years. It had expired in 1987, 36 years before this conversation. It had never been renewed. There was no record of any attempt to renew it. But here is where it went from a legal matter to a criminal one. The document Brenda had filed with the county clerk included an easement renewal dated 2003. It had a notary stamp, a county recorder's seal, a reference to a specific HOA board vote. Gerald had checked every single one of these. The notary stamp belonged to a woman who had died in 2001. The county seal was a forgery. The format matched a version that hadn't been in use since 1998. The meeting minutes had been backdated. The font and printer metadata were inconsistent with documents actually produced in 2003. Brenda Winchester had fabricated a legal easement. She had forged government seals. She had used a dead woman's notary credentials. And it went further. Cross-referencing HOA financial records, Gerald found that over 12 years, Brenda had been collecting a maintenance access fee from HOA funds to cover the legal and administrative costs of the easement, paid to a legal firm that had no record of the HOA as a client. The money over the 12-year period amounted to approximately $1.8 million in fraudulent disbursements. The road wasn't about a shortcut to a water pump. The road was about maintaining a fraud that had been funding Brenda Winchester's life for over a decade. Clayton looked at the documents on the kitchen table. Then he asked one question. "Is this enough to take to federal authorities?" Gerald said, "Clayton, this is more than enough." Clayton built his case the way he'd built every system in his career. Precisely, thoroughly, and without a single weak link. Every piece of evidence catalogued, dated, and cross-referenced. Every witness statement written, signed, and notarized. Every trail camera file logged with metadata. His attorney described the evidence file as the most organized document package she had ever received from a civilian client in 30 years of practice. He compiled documentation on 6 fronts: 47 trespassing incidents with camera images and timestamps, 31 incidents of property damage with receipts totaling $31,400, Gerald Moth's full forensic report with expert testimony, 14 years of fabricated financial records, 9 sworn statements from former board members confirming the easement renewal vote never happened, and full documentation of the paid tour operation. He packaged it all in a 4-inch binder, made 4 copies, one for his attorney, one for the county district attorney, one for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, one for his fireproof safe. The FBI agent who received his copy looked through the table of contents and said, "Mr. Rivers, how long did this take you?" Clayton said, "About 8 months, working evenings." The agent looked back at the binder. Then he asked, "You were in the Corps?" Clayton said, "28 years. Hydraulics." The FBI opened a formal investigation within 2 weeks. They asked Clayton to do one thing: do not tip her off. Let the investigation build. Clayton agreed, but he also told them the trespassing was ongoing. He asked what he was legally permitted to do to protect his own property. The agent told him anything a property owner is legally permitted to do. Clayton thanked him, drove home, and started designing something. He spent $12,000 on a commercial-grade hydraulic bollard system, the kind installed outside embassies, the kind used to protect government buildings from vehicle intrusion. Each bollard is a steel cylinder 8 inches in diameter and 40 inches tall. When retracted, they sit flush with the road surface. Invisible to someone who didn't know they were there, that section of gravel road looks exactly like every other section of gravel road. When deployed, they rise to full height in under 0.4 of a second, driven by hydraulic actuators rated to 3,000 pounds per square inch. Clayton installed 2 of them, side by side. He tested the system 11 times before he was satisfied. Then, he sent Brenda Winchester a certified letter. The language was plain. This property is private land. You have no legal right of access. A physical barrier has been installed on the private road. Use of the public road is required. Continued unauthorized entry will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This letter serves as your final notice. Brenda signed for it on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, she had posted a video to the HOA Facebook group. She said, "I am organizing a convoy for community rights next Saturday morning. We will be using our road. We will be live streaming the whole thing so this community can see exactly what is happening here." Clayton watched it from his tablet. He didn't call his attorney. He didn't call the FBI. He just forwarded it to both of them with a short note. "For your records, I believe this is relevant to timing." Then he went inside and sat with Sarah on the porch and watched the sun go down over the butterfly garden, which was in full spring bloom. He held her hand and watched the monarchs come in for the evening. Saturday, April 15th, 9:02 in the morning. The convoy assembled at the Meadowbrook Heights main entrance. 15 vehicles, handmade signs in some windows reading, "Community access is our right." The energy was festive, defiant. The energy of people who had been told by someone they trusted that they were the good guys. Brenda's white Lexus was at the front. Her phone was live streaming to the HOA Facebook group. Her viewer count climbed. 34, 71, 109. She said to the camera, "Good morning, everyone. We are standing up for our community today. We are using the road that this community has used for 17 years, and no threatening letter is going to change that." She put the car in drive. The convoy followed. They turned off the county road. They drove down the gravel lane toward Clayton's gate. The gate was unlocked. Clayton had left it that way. She pushed through it, filming herself, narrating for her audience. She drove down the road, 40 feet. The gravel looked completely normal. From his porch, Clayton pressed a button on his tablet. A low hydraulic hiss, then clang. The sound of steel meeting steel and steel meeting frame, and steel meeting everything underneath the vehicle moving at 15 miles per hour when 2 posts rose from the gravel in 0.4 of a second. The front end of the Lexus came up. The radiator crumpled inward. The transmission housing cracked. The engine over-revved and cut out. Fluid poured from a dozen places at once. Steam rose from under the hood in a slow, dramatic column. Brenda's phone was still filming. Her viewers were now at 312 and climbing. The 14 vehicles behind her stopped. They couldn't go forward. They couldn't back out easily. They were trapped on private property. And then the unmarked black SUVs came down the county road. 3 of them. Federal agents, coordinated with the county sheriff's office. Everything happening on camera. Brenda's camera, still streaming, still running. An agent approached her window. She was still filming. Her face, which 60 seconds ago had been triumphant, was now something else entirely. The agent asked her to step out of the vehicle. She asked why. He told her she was under arrest for document forgery, criminal fraud, and conspiracy to commit federal fraud. Her viewer count was at 847. She said on camera to 847 people, This is not, you can't. I am the HOA president." The agent said, "Yes, ma'am, I know. Please step out of the vehicle." She stepped out. She was handcuffed on her own live stream at 9:17 in the morning on a Saturday in April. The stream ran for another 40 seconds before someone in the convoy reached through the window and stopped it. By then, it had been screen recorded by approximately 200 people. Brenda Winchester was charged with 4 federal counts: document forgery, filing fraudulent instruments with a government office, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. She was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA was audited, found to have been systematically defrauded for 12 years, and dissolved. New leadership was elected. Residents received partial restitution. The HOA's maintenance access to the water pump was renegotiated with Clayton directly. He granted a formal, legal, documented easement for maintenance vehicles only at specific hours on a defined route that went nowhere near Sarah's garden. He charged them $1 per year. He said it made it legal. His attorney confirmed that it did. The $31,000 in property damages was paid in full. The Lexus was a total loss. Brenda's insurance denied the claim. As for Clayton and Sarah, Sarah's oncologist reported at her 18-month post-treatment scan that her cancer had gone into full remission. The doctor told Clayton afterward that he believed the reduction in household stress had played a meaningful role. That's not something a doctor says lightly. Sarah went back to her garden. The flowers she'd replanted after the trespassing were now, 2 seasons later, thicker and more established than they'd ever been. The monarchs had found them again, the swallowtails, the painted ladies. On the cedar bench that Clayton had built for her, the one with her initials carved in the back, Sarah sat most mornings with her coffee and watched them. Clayton fixed his fences. He learned more tree names. He drove into town and waved at neighbors from his truck window. They started a non-profit called the Rural Property Rights Foundation, providing legal guidance to rural landowners facing fraudulent easement claims and HOA overreach. In the first 2 years, they helped over 60 families. A reporter asked Clayton if he had any regrets about how he handled it. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I regret that it took 8 months. I'd do the documentation faster now." The reporter asked about the Bollards. Clayton smiled, just slightly. He said, "They're still there, still work fine. That's good engineering." There's a version of this story where Clayton Rivers does what most people do when someone bigger and louder decides to make their life difficult. He yells back, he threatens, he does something reactive that gives the other side a story to tell about him. Maybe he loses in court. Maybe the fraud continues for another decade because no one ever sat down and built the file. But Clayton had spent 28 years in a profession where being reactive cost lives, where the difference between a system that worked and a system that failed was documentation, precision, and patience. He brought all 3 of those things to his kitchen table on a ranch in East Texas. He put them in a 4-inch binder, and he won. Not because he was lucky, not because the system worked perfectly the first time, not because someone in authority rode in to save him, because he did the work that needed to be done, the way it needed to be done, for as long as it took. There's a lesson in that for anyone who's ever felt like someone with more power, more connections, or more confidence was running over something they'd built and cared about. You don't have to be louder than them, you just have to be more thorough. Document everything. Know your rights. Build your case before you deploy it. And if someone just won't stop, sometimes you let the steel do the talking.